The morning started like any other across the galaxy. Ships moved between stars. Traders shouted prices in crowded markets. Children played in streets made of crystal and stone. Then the silence came. It happened in the space of a single heartbeat. Across 10,000 worlds, billions of beings simply stopped existing. No flash of light, no warning, no sound. They were there, and then they were not. Chairs sat empty. Food grew cold on plates. Vehicles crashed into walls as their drivers disappeared mid-journey. On Earth, Marcus Chun stood in a hospital corridor in Detroit. He had been holding his daughter's hand. She was 7 years old and fighting cancer. The doctors had given her 3 months. Marcus had been fighting alongside her every single day. When the silence came, his daughter remained. So did he. But the nurses, the doctors, the other parents in the waiting room, they were gone. Across the planet, the pattern became clear within hours. Those who remained shared something. They had known struggle. Real struggle. The kind that breaks bones and spirits. The kind that leaves scars both visible and hidden. The refugees who had walked through deserts. The survivors of abuse who had rebuilt themselves piece by piece. The soldiers who had seen too much. The poor who had scraped for every meal. The sick who had fought their own bodies for years. Everyone else had vanished. The comfortable, the fortunate. Those born into ease who had never known true hardship. They were simply gone. Humanity's population dropped by 60% in that single moment. But humanity did not fall. The survivors looked at each other with eyes that understood without words. They had been fighting their whole lives. This was just another battle. Marcus carried his daughter out of the empty hospital. He found a car with keys still inside. He drove through streets filled with crashed vehicles and wandering people who wore the same expression of shock and determination. By nightfall, groups had already formed. People who knew how to survive were organizing. They had always known how to organize. It was how they had stayed alive. The same scene played out across the galaxy. On the Kalari homeworld, a species known for their technological advancement lost 90% of their population. The Kalari had achieved post-scarcity centuries ago. Most of their people had never experienced want or suffering. Only those few who had chosen difficult paths, the explorers, the researchers who had failed and failed again, the artists who would starve for their craft remained. The Vorthan Empire, built on conquest and cruelty, lost only 20%. Their society was harsh. Struggle was woven into their culture. Their remaining forces looked at the empty ships of their enemies and saw opportunity. Earth became a target within 3 galactic weeks. The Vorthan arrived expecting easy conquest. They found a world that had already reorganized itself. Former gang members worked alongside former soldiers. Single mothers who had raised children while working 3 jobs commanded supply lines with brutal efficiency. Recovering addicts who had rebuilt their lives from nothing showed the same discipline in combat. Marcus Chen had become a leader in what was now called the Detroit Collective. His daughter had improved. The doctors who remained had come from hard backgrounds themselves and worked with desperate focus. She sat in a bunker drawing pictures while her father helped coordinate the defense of an entire sector. The first Vorthan landing party touched down in what had been Canada. They expected terrified civilians. They found people who had survived residential schools, foster systems, and generations of trauma. People who had been fighting since birth. The Vorthan never sent a report back. They simply stopped transmitting. Word spread across the remaining galactic civilizations. Earth was not falling. Earth was fighting back with a ferocity that made no sense to species who had never known true hardship. The humans had no advanced weapons. They had no fleet. They had only themselves and the knowledge that giving up was not an option. A Kalari scientist named Thissa was one of the few survivors of her kind. She had spent her life studying failed experiments. She had known mockery from colleagues. She had known the struggle of being different in a society that valued success. When the silence came, she remained. She looked at the data from Earth and understood something important. The event had not been random. It had been a test. Someone or something had judged every conscious being in the galaxy and found most of them lacking. Only those forged in hardship had been deemed worthy of continuing. Thesa traveled to Earth. She had to see these humans for herself. She arrived to find a world transformed. Cities had been converted into fortress communities. Every person worked. Every person contributed. There was no unemployment because there was no room for it. But there was also something else, a strange joy that seemed impossible given the circumstances. Marcus met her at what had been Chicago. His daughter rode on his shoulders. The child was smiling despite everything. Thesa asked how this was possible. Marcus looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and smiled anyway. He explained that humans who had struggled understood something others did not. They knew that happiness was not the absence of suffering. It was the choice to find light in darkness. It was the decision to laugh even when crying felt easier. His people had been making that choice their entire lives. The Vorthen sent a larger fleet. 300 ships descended on Earth with enough firepower to crack continents. The humans had captured alien technology from the first invasion. They had reverse engineered it in weeks, not because they were smarter than other species, but because the engineers who remained had learned their skills through constant failure and persistence. The battle lasted 6 days. The humans lost millions, but they had lost people before. They knew grief. They knew how to carry it and keep moving. The Vorthen had never experienced true loss on this scale. When their commanders began dying, their fleet fell into chaos. They had no concept of fighting through despair. Earth's defenders pushed them back into space with weapons held together by desperate engineering and sheer refusal to quit. Thesa documented everything. She transmitted her findings across what remained of the galactic network. Other species began to understand. They began to seek out their own survivors, the ones who had struggled, the ones who understood hardship. These individuals became leaders, not because they wanted power, but because they knew how to function when everything was falling apart. 5 years passed. The galaxy reshaped itself around a new reality. The species that had survived with the largest populations were those with the harshest cultures. But harsh did not mean cruel. The difference became clear over time. The Vorthen were harsh and cruel. They broke their own people to maintain power. They had survivors, but those survivors carried trauma that made them dangerous to everyone, including themselves. Their empire began to collapse from within as old resentments exploded into open conflict. Humanity was harsh in a different way. Life on Earth had always been difficult. But humans had learned to find connection in that difficulty. They built communities. They supported each other. Their struggle had taught them empathy because they recognized suffering in others. They knew what it meant to need help because they had needed it themselves. Marcus watched his daughter grow stronger every month. The doctors who remained had discovered that healing happened faster when patients had communities around them. They had always known this, but now they had proof. The cancer retreated. His daughter began to run again. She played with other children who had also been fighting their own battles. The Galactic Council reformed with new members. Humans were invited despite having no interstellar capability before the event. The remaining Kalari nominated them. Thesa spoke before the assembly and explained what she had learned. Struggle was not a punishment. It was a preparation. The universe was vast and dangerous. Whatever intelligence or force had caused the vanishing had selected for those who could survive what was coming. And something was coming. Thesa had detected energy readings at the edge of known space. Something was approaching. Something that would test every remaining being in the galaxy. The soft civilizations would have been destroyed. They had no capacity for sacrifice. They had no understanding of pain or loss. They would have crumbled at the first difficulty. Those who remained understood that survival sometimes required giving everything. Marcus became Earth's representative to the council. He brought his daughter with him. She had beaten cancer. She had survived the vanishing. She had lived through an alien invasion. She was 12 years old and had already faced more than most beings in the galaxy had faced in centuries. The other representatives looked at her with something approaching awe. She looked back at them with the calm confidence of someone who had already stared death in the face and refused to blink. Humanity began building ships, not because they wanted conquest, but because they understood that the galaxy needed them. Other species contributed technology and resources. In return, humans taught them what they knew about survival. They taught them that breaking was not the end. They taught them that scars were proof of healing. They taught them that the darkest moments could be survived if you refused to give up. The energy readings grew closer. Thesis projections suggested contact within 2 years. Whatever was coming, it was vast. It was powerful. It was something the old galaxy could never have faced. But the old galaxy was gone. The new one was built by survivors, by fighters, by those who had known nothing but struggle and had chosen to keep going anyway. Marcus stood on the observation deck of Earth's first interstellar vessel. His daughter stood beside him, now a young woman of 17 with eyes that had seen everything and still found reasons to smile. Around them, humans and aliens who had all earned their survival through suffering worked together with a unity that would have seemed impossible just years before. The future was uncertain. It was dangerous. It promised difficulty beyond anything they had yet faced. Marcus smiled. Difficulty was all they had ever known. And they were still here. The ship jumped into hyperspace, toward whatever was waiting, toward the next struggle, toward the proof that those born to fight would always find a way to survive. Behind them, Earth turned slowly in the darkness. A world that had lost everything and rebuilt itself. A world that had answered the question of human worth with blood and stubborn refusal to quit. A world that had shown the galaxy what it meant to be forged in hardship. The vanishing had been a culling, but for humanity, it had been something else entirely. It had been a recognition. The universe had looked at the species that crawled up from nothing, that had fought itself and nature and circumstance for every inch of progress, that had known suffering in every generation, and still reached for the stars, and the universe had decided that they were worthy, not because they were special, but because they refused to stop trying, and as long as they kept refusing, they would survive whatever came next.